How are you?
We meet again. What's going on, man?
Well, all is good here, actually, apart from my infected thumb, which I've just got antibiotics, which is looking a bit kind of bruised. But anyway, it's sensitive and a bit painful, but I've got the stuff and I will just take the course. Other than that, everything is very good, I have to say. I had a couple of very interesting developments with regard to my book over the
Okay.
course of the um, last week or so. So
Yeah.
I spoke to a very good friend of mine who is American, who's in New York, black guy. Actually, I think originally a neurosurgeon, became an investor. He's a doctor, but he's a very interesting, a very bright guy. He runs a company called Future, which he runs with his partner, who's is really a futurist who used to work, I think, for someone like Microsoft Labs or something like that. And they're a very interesting role. And they
Yeah.
basically invest with other people in all kinds of very, very I would say very innovative technologies in whatever category, whether it's frankly AI or it's medical or it's anyway. I've known him for a while and a very good guy. We meet periodically in London or New York, and I just dropped a line. I haven't spoken for ages about Thanksgiving. I wish him well and we'll see holidays and so forth. And we were chatting away with this and that, and he was also aware of the book. And he said, by the way, I know some people within the kind of let's put it, within the black business community in America, all a matter of a certain caliber. Anyway, he said there are two people who run podcasts in areas which touch upon much of what you've written about. And I would like you to send them a signed copy of the book via me, which I did today. And the four people, split into two, first of all, the Williams sisters, as in Venus and Serena Williams, because obviously I know what the collection is, but he obviously knows them as again, achievers in different fields. Obviously, they're black. That's one. They've got a podcast of their own. I'm not sure the title of it. The other one, Gail King and Oprah Winfrey,
Yeah.
who I said, well, yeah. So I sent that off to them today, and no doubt we had over holidays. I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you. Sent them a copy, one to other things as well. That's all great. So that's just kind of come out of the blue.
Wow.
He's a very kind of he's a very proactive guy.
Yeah.
The other thing, which again came slightly out of the blue, I got involved with a random. So I think I mentioned to you last time. My book started in basically pre-COVID era. I'd written part of it then, and
Yeah.
always about it. And certain people had pre-ordered books, but basically paid in advance. Cross section of people, most people I knew quite well, and friends and associates. But one person bought a book who I didn't know very well at all. She was a friend of a friend. I met her once, came to a dinner maybe, I'm not sure. Anyway, and I hadn't heard from her for quite some time. I think my contact details were at a date or work. Anyway, got hold of my friend, got her new details. She is actually Ukrainian, and she had gone back to Kiev, started the war, sadly. She was originally involved in real estate, rather
Yeah.
successful business, went back home, and she started with a partner a charity called Mission Ukraine. And Mission Ukraine basically provides a range of services such as uh, art therapy, music therapy, rehabilitation, retraining, basically for people who are either veterans of war, people who have had injuries, women and children, people who obviously suffered depredations of the conflict. Anyway, done remarkable things, bear in mind the backdrop in terms of raising money and services, but they're a bit short, inevitably.
Yeah.
I said, by the way, I think it'd be a very good idea if you found a simple device to take your story, as a story of Ukraine, beyond your borders. And I said, if you ask most people, whether they're in Europe or they're in America or anywhere else, what they know about Ukraine, they'll tell you there's a war. They'll have no idea about your food,
Yep.
your religion, your costume, your literature, nothing at all. I mean, hardly anything, I would say. And I said, what I would recommend is you actually utilize all your embassies, particularly around Europe. I said, embassies are there for far more than simply conducting trade missions or stamping your passport. They're there to build cultural and social ties anyway. So I said, look, I recommend you aim on a bunch of European capitals. London's a good example. You can go to Berlin, you can go to Rome, whatever, and you use the embassies there as a pivot to bring in people from the Ukrainian diaspora in these different cities and people who
Yep.
are interested in sport. Well, anyway, bring them all together over a dinner, tell your story, hopefully raise some capital as well. I said, London's a good side point. She said, actually, well, could you actually do that for us in London, like an offline dinner, the way I did in the past? And I moved to weakness. I just said, well, yeah, okay. So this is moved on, whereby it's a big thing. It's in April next year at my club, probably for about, I'm not quite sure, let's say 70 people, give or take. And the other thing which alongside this emerged was because of the music therapy they provided through the charity Mission Ukraine. She got to know a fellow called Herman Makarenko, who in fact is the principal conductor for the Ukrainian Philharmonic Orchestra. And he got very interested in this project as well. In the meantime, he revealed that he had, through his associates, discovered the score of a very famous Ukrainian opera written in 1775 by a fellow you would never heard of, but very important in terms of who he was and the historical context and the story of the opera. And this thing literally showed up, I'm sorry, Joe, in a university library in Portugal. I mean, unbelievable. They showed up, they restored it, digitized it. They held the world premiere of this concert, or this opera rather, in Chernovitzy in Ukraine about 3 months ago. I couldn't go, but friends of mine who will catch it as well went there. It was pretty amazing, albeit halfway through the performance, there were sirens and the entire building, basically cast and attendees all over the cakes. And, how long it took. And you fire back inside when you get the orchestra and carry on with the performance. So it gives you an idea of the challenges there. Anyway, they basically want to take this opera to London, to Venice, where it was originally performed. And so I've got involved in that as well. Somehow, anyway, because of all of this, basically, it was all great. I got to know people rather well, and they were very, very appreciative of what I'd done. Anyway, come long story short, they said to me out of the blue, by the way, can we connect you to a very good friend of ours here who's a publisher? And I said, okay, cool. Anyway, we had a conversation the other day, and basically this guy says, look, I basically want to buy the foreign language rights to your book for Ukraine. And I said, oh, yeah, great. Out of nowhere. I said, yeah, sure, okay. So that's kind of going on literally in the last sort of day. I'm actually looking at the contract. My publishers working out who's doing what, and where the payments are going. But those two things, number one, the dual podcast, the Williams sisters plus Oprah Winfrey and Gayle King, then this Ukraine thing, which has really come about, frankly, because I just said yes rather a lot. And we built confidence and we built rapport. And I met with them in London and I introduced to other people who were similarly motivated and could help me in other ways. And so it is. And just as a consequence of that, they just said, by the way, almost slightly off the cuff, let's have a chat with our friend Pablo. I said, well, sure. And Pablo basically says to me, we have a small publishing house and we publish books by certain historical authors who are interesting. Kerouac, or they do, I don't know, W.G. Sebald, or they do the Marquis de Sade, or they also do contemporary Ukrainian writers, but they're quite particular. And he said, I'd love to have your book on our list, and we'd love to start the process now. I said, well, be my guest, off we go. So that's great. So those two things, so it's a slightly long-winded way of explaining it all, but things are all positive. And I'm going off tomorrow with my partner to Paris for 3-4 days, just because I think I told you she's actually French.
Yeah.
So we're actually not going for anything in particular. We're having dinner with some of our cousins, and we'll see one or two friends and people in the art world, and I don't know, wander around, go to the old Christmas market, not too much of anything, but just have a short break. So that's quite fun. Looking forward to that. Other than that, what else can I tell you? The film stuff is going well. I think I may have mentioned to you, I was asked to get involved with a couple of film projects, and none of them go, which I know frankly nothing, but they seem to think that I had some value to offer. It's extraordinary in a way. Why me? What have I done? What am I saying? And look, obviously they saw something. So that's all going very well. And the other thing which obviously about that was interesting. So number one, there's a particular film all about the art world, which I thought would be a brilliant idea. And this film director agreed. He's written a treatment, the whole thing. And we've got to go out now and sort people out and the connections and raise some seed capital. And touch with family offices and film studios and streamers. And look, it's not really my world, but I know a lot of people. So I'm somehow part of the conversation almost by association, rather than lending any particular expertise. So that's great. But the film director said to me a while ago, How much I mentioned to you before. We were originally introduced to a mutual friend about another film, about art. And we got chatting about this and that. Obviously, Offline came up, and he loved the whole concept, the whole idea. And in fact, he wasn't talking about it. He said, I actually love the whole thing. I wanted to do something similar myself many years ago. He bought the book, he read it, gave me a great review on Amazon. And he said, look, I love to do basically like an offline travelogue. You just sort of, I don't know, wandering around locally or maybe further afield, talking to people, interrupting, eating with them, pointing things out, commenting what they're reading or what they're, I mean, whatever. I said, yeah, great. But he's very interested in somehow the idea of that kind of human interaction. And he said, what I really think would be great is to take offline globally as a movement.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, I mean, I obviously thought about that, but I didn't really have the tools myself. I needed people who were, in a sense, able to build a brand in that way. They're all involved within sort of film and music and media and things I don't really understand, I'm going to be honest with you. But basically, that is now kicked off, whereby he said, I want to introduce a friend of mine into the mix. This guy is ex-BBC, ex-Google X, and they're all advertising originally. Very creative, very clever guy. And this thing's now starts to kind of, build a real kind of momentum. But the most interesting aspect of all of this, Joe, is the fact that I am learning with increasing frequency of the number of young people who want to embrace an analog life.
Yeah.
Who want to live without this obsession with digital. And whether people are running detox retreats or they're running cabins in the woods or wild water swimming or you're somehow doing it with your hands and you're outside and it's communal. In fact, the technology gets in the way.
Yeah.
When you're immersed and engaged in a particular thing, you don't really think about it anyway. So I met a couple of young guys who are very immersed in that kind of world. They've got their own events as well, but they actually are a hub for about 450 organizations in the UK, probably in the US and elsewhere. And they're all similarly motivated. Some are quite small, some are quite local, but there's a sense, there's a momentum. I can just feel it all around. And I'm really, in a sense, just riding the wave. I mean, obviously, I don't kind of, as I said to you before, it's not like I don't have any great skill, but I'm certainly curious and I'm prepared to take a chance. I'm prepared to invite people into the conversation, even if I don't know them or they look a bit strange. Because sometimes it's that very strange sense of the unknown which yields opportunity. You go somewhere and you kind of know who's there. You saw them last week and the week before that. There's a kind of formula. You know what they're going to be saying and the order of play. But when it's all a little bit unfamiliar, you just pay a bit more attention. People often offer some very interesting insights. So there we go. That's me. That's my kind of quick précis of my last sort of week or two. But all good. And you?
Everything's great, man. You know what's interesting about what you're talking about? I just had an interview today with the former executive at Facebook and Meta. And I said, what do you see happening in 20 years from now? Since you've been on the inside of this behemoth, what do you see happening? And her basic commentary was, in this world of AI and real, there's going to be a reversion back to analog, offline, what you're talking about. Like, we've already seen it with vinyl. People want a more pristine version. They want to go through the storybook of an album instead of cherry picking a playlist of a song. So I think what you're talking about is I think that humans, weirdly enough, in this advanced age that we're in right now, we're going to start going back to this level of like wanting a connection with another human being. And we felt that during the pandemic. Everybody was on digital. Everybody was doing all kinds of technology things. But I think this whole wave post COVID is to get back into that association with human beings face to face.
I agree with you. I mean, to me, in a way, you can say to your guest that I'm delighted to say that she's seen the light, because I think there's no question at all that it's a bit stop start. I think at the moment what you're seeing really is people who are frankly the outliers. I mean, the 1% of the 1%, but it's just growing, and there's very little resistance. That's the other thing about it. There are some people who are a bit kind of suspicious or feel as though somehow it's not for them or it's not going to somehow be to their advantage. But I think all the while, the simple act of being together and giving somebody your attention, don't do anything. You go for a walk in the park. You bring the dog as well if you like, but it's somehow about being intentional and having some kind of purpose to what you're doing. And purpose doesn't necessarily require action. You don't need to be physically going somewhere or buying something or making some kind of statement to almost validate your existence. Sometimes the simple pleasure of being there is enough.
Yeah.
Just sitting in the park and listening to the wind
Yeah.
or the birds, or
Yeah.
recognizing the leaves on different trees and why some are losing their leaves and some are evergreen. I mean, I don't know why some dogs seem to be, bark louder the smaller they are. I mean, I don't know why. I mean, I'm not a dog person, but you understand what I'm trying to say. Just
Yeah.
start being a little bit more observant of life. And I think what she reflects is interesting in a way, because one thing I will tell you is that we were thinking about, well, okay, we can basically build this really every which way. And in a way, that's a blessing and a curse. You can
Yeah.
almost have too much choice, because obviously I think the offline message is pretty universal. Now, obviously, the one interesting aspect of the approach I had to sell language rights into Ukraine is Ukraine would be a very interesting test ground
Yeah.
for innovation and people who are prepared to improvise, take a bit of a chance, live like a little bit on the edge, without somehow having a handbook alongside them to guide them along the way. And there's no question that Ukraine's got what, 35 million people, and I would say if you've got 10% of them trying to interested in one form or another, whether they read the book or they go to an offline event, it doesn't matter a great deal. But somehow you feel there's a kind of there's a rhythm to it. People just somehow and as it kind of gathers pace, people feel a little bit more kind of more engaged. And I think people are, for the most part, frankly, disengaged. That's half the problem today. They're disengaged,
Yeah.
and they are oblivious to what's going on around them. And even on the most prosaic basis, I mentioned before, people used to ask me, well, how do you somehow engage people who you don't actually know? In a regular situation, you in the street. I said, there's one thing I do very strongly recommend, and this thing actually is not unique to me or to you, but to everybody. It doesn't require, 10 years of study. It doesn't require some kind of academic science. You know what it is? Smiling. Smiling, Joe, is a very powerful emotional tool.
Yeah.
You don't do anything, or for that matter, waving.
Yeah.
You might get the wrong person. It doesn't matter a big deal. It's not as if somebody's actually going to challenge you for it. But again, it's not as though it's some complicated maneuver.
Right.
You'll see this. I'm actually I'm off to college. What I'm doing is I'm learning how to wave and just smile.
Yeah.
And just say thank you.
Yeah.
It's some kind of really difficult task, and I hope I get to the end. I get my grades and so forth. No, it's all routine. You do it. You grow up. It's a regular part of life. But people forget, and somehow people are governed by this awful nagging fear that if they make some kind of inopportune remark or they catch somebody at the wrong moment, some disaster will befall them. No, of course not.
Yeah.
But on the whole, most people are quite receptive.
Yeah.
Even if you've got no idea whether you're actually waving at them,
right,
or whether they actually appreciate the interaction. It doesn't matter a great deal. But by the law of averages, you're going to find if you do it 10 times in the morning, 5 or 6 times people actually will acknowledge you. Maybe they'll smile back at you or say hello or whatever. Again, no consequence, no sort of fireworks afterwards, but somehow in a very, very small, very atomized way, you can engage with people. And maybe you'll do it in a funny way more often if they're actually walking their dog in the park, because the dog becomes a kind of prop. And you feel a bit more comfortable having that point of connection. If you're somehow on your own and you're a bit kind of naked somehow, you don't have anything to rely upon, if you're sort of standing there, it's like you're frozen. I mean, you can then comment on the magnificent view and how wonderful it's been this November, but the truth of the matter is people are having fear that they'll stand there and everybody will see they've stood there because of course nobody's got anything better to do with their time but from just gawp from 100 yards at some guy who's a bit tongue-tied at the wrong moment. No, nobody cares. Nobody cares. Yeah. It's like, smile, so you're saying, see you next time. And off you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you this. Do you ever just totally take time off from what you're doing? Because you're talking about running into people. There's things that are proposed. There's just all kinds of activity. Is there ever a time where you're like off the clock, or is this constant? There's always kind of this eternal network of networking going on.
Well, to be honest with you, I think it's a question. I would say I'm always on, but I don't look at it as networking.
Yeah.
To me, it's not really working at all.
Right.
I myself, not that I want to demean it, but to me, in a way, it's just life.
Yeah.
I don't somehow package it in a way whereby I think, okay, I'm kind of give it my all today, and I'm going to make sure I say good morning to 17 people, and I'll see if I can beat my performance last week. Sometimes I see no people. I sit on the subway and read my book. It's also fine. So no, I would say to you that I don't work in a very conventional way whereby I have a kind of working day. I mean, I can frankly get up in the middle of the night and read or write, or frankly, look at the stars. Um, so I would say I am on in the sense that I'm just a very curious person. So in a way, I can walk down the street with no plan, no sense of any kind of action. I'm just drawn in an interesting direction. I hear an interesting accent, for example, or I see a label or a bag, or I'm reminded of a piece of music, or I see something I thought I remember from 4 years ago, or somebody else's sister. Maybe none of those things, but somehow I would say to you that my antennae are always somehow just, they're always tweaking a little bit all the time.
Yeah.
So there are also other days where I spend my days reading. I mean, about what? Well, all kinds of, I mean, all sorts of things. But I mean, that could be an art book, it could be a sport, it could be a biography, it could be the news, it could be business, it could be poetry, it could be, there's always in a way. And
Yeah.
I like to keep things broad in scope. I don't like to be confined. And I think the challenge today is that too many people are very much more concerned with sticking to their lane, whereby they know the routes, they did it last time, and somehow there's less chance of cocking things up.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. If you could have a dream tonight and run into a relative in your bloodline, no matter how far back, is there a relative in your line that you would love to run into and have some face-to-face time with?
Ooh, that's a good question. In the past, look, I think there were certainly people who I never met who sound as though they led an interesting life,
Yeah.
albeit in a different context, different place, maybe. I mean, of the people who I knew who are no longer around, so I got some frame of reference. Um, it depends a little bit on what I will be doing. If
Right.
it's a bit of conversation just about, just life, or whether it's something a bit more profound, or something with a particular passion, I think that, who I like to spend more time, or some time speaking with today. Um, my father had uh, two uncles, one of whom he was very close to. Partly, I think, because his uncle had two daughters, and my father was almost the son he never had. And they got on very well. And he was a very interesting guy who had been, he was probably born around 1894 ish. Becomes a teacher originally, and then a journalist. And he then, um, with some old friends, he had a very good friend who was a young man who, with his business partner, created one of the first major cinema chains in the UK.
Wow.
And they built basically a portfolio. This is from the 1920s, 1930s onwards. As long as they would buy dilapidated and rather forgotten cinemas, basically in sort of market towns and maybe 50, 100 miles outside London. So they were subprime sites, but they were obviously attracted to a suburban audience. And somewhere, I don't know where it was, this former school friend of his said, look, we'd love you to come in, basically sort of run it, basically, I suppose, like a COO. Just go round all the kind of cinemas around the south of England, just check out what they're doing and the takings and the feel in the community and what they want to see more. And my father would say, he was probably dead in his, he was 19, 20. He said, I'd go around with my uncle. It was great. It was the way, first of all, we were one on one together, driving around, listening to the way he dealt with people,
Yeah.
how he handled challenging situations. But he had an interesting life as well. And, he had his two daughters, one of whom I didn't actually meet. One was actually married into an Egyptian family, a very interesting background story. So right, the other one in America. Um, but he never had any capital as such, but he led an interesting life because of who he knew, his demeanor, people he met. My father said his uncle was the very first person who ever took him to what we call here, actually, you have a different view, to a gentleman's club.
Yeah.
Obviously, in America, it means like a strip club. I understand that, but in
Yeah.
the UK, a gentleman's club was basically a very well-heeled establishment for gentlemen. It was an escape for women folk. And obviously, you go there, you could eat and drink and play cards or fall asleep, whatever you want to do. But it was a point of connection for people, often in different professions. You find there are gentlemen's club people who are just in the army, or support a particular political party, or people in the church, or people of a profession, whatever it may be. Some are very established, some with fabulous premises and wonderful, food and wine, and very grand in a way. And my father said his uncle took him to a place called the National Liberal Club, which was based upon originally the precepts of the Liberal Party. And it was actually still there. It's kind of a prominent club, albeit it's not quite got the same liberal connotations anymore. And he said, just going there, it just opened my eyes to people from very different walks of life, and where this guy was some kind of, naval officer, and the guy we hear he was a writer, and he was in the stock market, and somebody else here was like a retired academic, and then he said some of the world opened up to me. Number one, I was spending time on the road.
Yeah,
that's when he was looking around to the cinemas. I come with him for a day, and then when I went to the club, he said suddenly it just opened up new vistas, and I think he was a very interesting guy. I never met him, sad. He died in 19. I think late 50s. Unfortunately, both he and another of my grandfather's brothers were gassed in the First World War, and I think it had a big impact on their overall health. And sadly, they both died probably in their. Oh, Harry must have been, I don't know, 65. I don't know. I mean, he wasn't an old man, but a very vibrant, very interesting guy who was full of life and who led an interesting, sort of experiences. And I think he was an interesting person. I liked him. But say what my father said of him,
yeah,
in terms of the world he mixed in, the challenges, the tumult of world wars, and how society adapted, and how he found his place, different roles. Originally a teacher, and then he became a journalist, and then he did something else, and then he went to work for this cinema chain as a kind of, I think they call it like a general manager. I'm not quite sure what they call it exactly, but you get the gist of it.
yeah,
He was an interesting guy, for
yeah.
sure.
So I'm curious if you had a dream. I'm going to stay in this dreamy state here. You had a dream and you ran into a 13-year-old version of you, and you walked into the room at your age now, and you had a book in your hands, and it was like a coffee table book, and you handed it to that version of you and said, "This is how your life turned out." Would that young version of you believe it?
No, no. I don't think my 13-year-old self was actually mature enough to actually look at the world quite so broadly. I mean, I think the problem today in a way, Joe, is that children grow up much too quickly.
Yeah,
And when I was a 13-year-old boy, I'd probably be like you. I lived the life of a 13-year-old boy, not an 18-year-old boy or a 28-year-old man. I somehow didn't have such extensive horizons. What
yeah,
was my life about? My life was basically about, placing my sort of football sticker album and swapping with my friends, and just kind of getting the first sort of stirrings of my kind of adolescence, and just navigating the world and wondering why my voice had broken and my friend had not. Yeah, these were very kind of low key things. It wasn't as though somehow. No, I don't know. I did. I mean, I'm sure I looked at things because I was always interested and I was curious and I loved books anyway. But I wouldn't say there was only one title where I thought to myself, yeah, this is kind of like this is like a roadmap leading to where you will go. No,
yeah,
I don't. I just don't think I was kind of. I don't think I was especially self-aware at that
yeah,
age. I was 13 a long time ago. The world was, it's difficult in a way because you're looking at the modern world with all its accoutrements and the speed and the efficiency and the choice, and it just wasn't like that. I mean, I had a conversation many years ago with my kids, and they were always small at the time, probably I don't know 5 somewhere, and we were watching Sky TV. It was a huge satellite channel, multiple platforms and so forth, and so it came up, but we were talking about the range of options they had to look at some TV program. And I said, when I was growing up, we basically had three channels. We had BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV, which is an independent one. And then subsequently, many years later, we had Channel 4. And then it all exploded. It was all deregulated. My children were aghast. My children couldn't believe that somehow I managed to navigate my entire childhood
Yep.
with three television channels. I mean, what a crazy idea is that? But even more, I didn't go to the first extreme. I felt something a bit unfair. I want to say, so actually, when I started watching television, it was a black and white. What? Black and white? What? What? What a crazy idea. But yeah, and in a way, so the difficult thing is, I think my world was much smaller. And in a way, it was actually richer as a result. There were fewer distractions, there were fewer choices. I had to make my own enjoyment, whether I made friends or I went for a walk, I went to the park, I played tennis, but somehow I was more self-sufficient.
Yeah.
I think not only are you given 101 options, but you're actually given guidance as to how to maximize those 101 options. And that wasn't the world I came from. And I think for you either, and I think for young people today, certainly adolescents, it's a struggle just simply to work out what is worth pursuing and what's actually not. And on top of that, then you've got the whole notion of AI and the algorithm. And is what you're looking at real? I mean, can I meet you next week? Or are you some figment of my imagination?
Yep.
Well, I didn't know about that problem. I mean, so the answer to the question is no, I didn't. But I mean, it's an interesting question you ask all the same.
Yeah. So I'm curious, the common question is, what's the best advice you've ever gotten? But I want to reverse that and ask you, what's the best advice that you would give anybody right now? If somebody was curious about living on this planet after all of these years, what advice would you give?
I would give very simple advice, actually. It's very much woven into the offline sort of lingua franca in a way. And that is always try to display an open mind and a generosity of spirit.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. I don't come with any kind of, qualifications or, deep research or any of the sort, frankly. But I think if you are at least present or vaguely interested in what you want to say, you pay attention, you look them in the eye, you'll find you get an awfully long way. The difficult thing is, unfortunately, people are very, very competitive, as though somehow, number one, they've got to get in first, and they've got to be louder, and they've got to be more forceful, and they've got to, in a sense, if you don't agree with them, they're looking for some way to reinforce their superiority at your expense. And that's another sad factor of the modern world, whereby, is part of the consequence of social media. Everything is compared all the time. And I just think to myself, why? I mean, does it matter? I mean, nobody's keeping score. If you step off for a day or two, those actually, as I was saying, it's always the notion if I take one brick out of the wall, the whole edifice will wobble and collapse. Not really. People say, that's a funny colour. People actually go, there's a hole in the wall. Okay, that's the answer. We move on.
Yeah.
Rather sit and think, oh my God, let's get the constant engineers in because no, just take a chance. And I just feel live your life more slowly, more authentically, more in a more human way, in a sense. I mean, you see, the curious thing for me is the fact that I don't come to the table with any kind of skills as such. It's not like I've got some kind of gift or talent, or not that I recognise in an obvious way, but I'm prepared to take a chance. And I'll pick up a book which I maybe haven't picked up before, or I'll ask somebody a question which I probably wouldn't have asked last week, or I'll try some new dish which got a very strange name, or I'll just take a chance and actually, just let the mate order for me. Don't like it, I won't have it again, but I'll try it. And I think the difficult thing is that people are far too concerned about not screwing up, which is why people have closed minds or no minds. And the fear that somehow some awful consequence will emerge as a result. The fear that you have no control over the narrative, where you are, how long it lasts, who else will be there. That's all just negative energy, Joe. I don't understand why people are so concerned. But obviously, I am aware that some people have different perspectives to me. Nothing wrong with that. Some people are, to use a slightly kind of. There's a word which obviously I am aware of and you will be aware of as well. And it's one of those kind of rather catch-all words which means everything and nothing at the same time. Yeah. And that's the word neurodivergent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. What do you mean? Okay, he's a bit slow. okay, yeah, okay, or unsure about her sexuality. Oh, okay, fine, okay. But somehow these words emerge to describe anybody who's struggling to somehow navigate what I would call the regular rules of the road.
Yeah.
And you've got to provide some justification. There's a very great talk given by Ken Robinson years ago at TED. And he was talking, he was an educator, very famous guy. And he said, there were a lot of conditions years ago which actually are broadly the same as you have today. So unfortunately, things like, he said, when I was growing up, ADHD hadn't been invented.
Yeah.
Now, or obviously, or you might say things like, PTSD.
Yeah.
Postnatal depression. Yeah, in a way, postnatal, well, no, she's malingering. PTSD, we have a shock, you'll get over it. Neurodiversion, she'll find them. But yeah, I think in a way, it's a good thing and a bad thing that in the sense these different conditions we feel have been given greater definition.
Yeah.
But the problem in a way is working out who actually fits within those groups, who somehow just sort of, just looking for a free lunch. Yeah. And some are crazy, saying, I couldn't work today, I had a bad back. Really? Or you're saying a terrible toothache. Things that nobody can prove otherwise.
Yeah.
But somehow you use as a reason not to be part of the conversation or not to go to work or not to somehow meet your commitments. And there's a lot of that today as well, I'm afraid.
Yeah. So again, we've completely run away with our time here. Offline is your wonderful world, your concept. How can people get involved?
Well, the first thing to say, they can buy the book, which you know is called Leave Your Phone at the Door.
Yes.
It is available on Amazon, which is frankly much the best way of obtaining it. You can find out more about me if you go to LinkedIn, put my name in, and you will find a whole bunch of interviews I did about the book and the offline philosophy. Particularly interesting was the Vox Pop I did in Bryant Market in New York, where I randomly interviewed one Sunday morning people at the market, and I asked them two questions. I had it filmed, it's all there, people to look at different guises. Question number one: when did you last? What was the first question? Hang on. The first question was, when did you last go out without your mobile phone?
Yeah.
And number two, what would you do more of if you didn't have your mobile phone permanently attached to your side? And so I would say there were some very revealing answers. And some people were very honest about their addiction, as they put it, or their need to somehow obsessively check and scroll and whatever. Other people actually saying, no, I look at it once a day. Yeah. Or I look at it, after work. Or when I go away on holiday, or I go on a hike, I didn't put it in my bag or leave it behind. So there were people who were especially self-aware, but the majority of people somehow could not conceive of a life without it. Yep. And yet, having had the question posed to them in that way, they did have second thoughts. Yep. They did have second thoughts. And I think you see, again, going back to the original conversation we had about analog and young people embracing a non-digital life, there's a big appetite out there. I think for a lot of people, it's just recognizing it in themselves and not thinking that somehow to push it away is a weakness on their part. I would say actually it's a great strength. I say to everybody who listens to this particular interview,